Good afternoon, and thank you for joining Eastern Connecticut State University to discuss the hidden world of porn with Maya Schleien, an educator of antipornography.org. My name is Darshima Byram, and I serve as Eastern's coordinator of the Women's Center, as well as the Sexual Assault and Interpersonal Violence Response Team, SAVE-RT. Today's presentation does contain graphic content and can trigger some audience members. If at any point you need to step out, please feel free to do so. In addition, if you need to speak with someone about how you're feeling or if you have questions or concerns, I will be present during the duration of this program, and I can also provide you with some resources, and we have resources right in the front on the table. Counseling and psychological services is certainly one of those sources that we are sharing with you all today. Please join me in welcoming Maya Schleien. Maya is a feminist activist, writer, and speaker, and organizer based in Toronto, Canada. A student at Ryerson University, Maya's work focuses especially on issues surrounding violence against women. She's a volunteer with antipornography.org, doing public education about the harms of pornography, and she's the founder of Touch a Woman's Heart, a project that does outreach to women abused and exploited in strip clubs. She is also currently co-organizing a series of feminist workshops across Canada that are geared toward young women. Please join me in welcoming Maya.
Hi everyone, testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. So as Darshima said, my name is Maya. I'm a volunteer with antipornography.org. We're a non-religious, non-partisan, non-profit organization that works to combat and prevent the harms of pornography, prostitution, and sex trafficking. And as Darshima mentioned, I'm also involved in other feminist things and things to do with violence against women. So again, I just want to repeat that there are going to be some disturbing things in this presentation, including 2 videos. I'm going to warn everybody both times before playing the videos, and if anybody wants to step out, I totally understand. They're very upsetting. And we also have some resources for learning more about pornography and the harms of pornography on the table, as well as ideas for things that you can do on campus to work around this issue. So feel free to take those at any time and take a look at those as well. So without any further ado, I think I'm going to get into my presentation, The Hidden World of Porn. So I'm going to start off by defining what pornography actually is, because if we say that we're against porn or that we have concerns about porn, it's important to be specific about what it is that we're talking about. And there's this idea that any pictures or videos of people being naked or having sex is porn. But in my experience, and I think in the experience of many people who have been in the industry, who know things about it, I think that that doesn't fully cover it. I think there's a bit more to it than just that. So just to go back a little bit, in the 1980s there was a very large feminist movement that was working to address this issue as a violence against women issue. And one of the many things that they came up with was this thing called the Civil Rights Ordinance. I'm going to talk again about that later. But it was basically a piece of legislation that would have addressed porn as a form of violence against women, and it would have allowed women to sue for damages. So in this ordinance that they wrote up, they defined pornography as the graphic, sexually explicit subordination of women through pictures. So I know that's a bit wordy, but it just basically means pictures and videos where sex is used to make women unequal. So women are put down in some way relative to men, or women are unequal in some way relative to men, and that's expressed through sexuality. And of course, this can also apply to men, to children, to other people in pornography. There's things like gay pornography that often follows a similar theme of one person dominating another person. I'm going to focus mostly on women in this presentation just because it's one of the more popular forms of pornography. It sells a lot. But any of the themes that I talk about today, a lot of them also apply to gay pornography, if anyone's wondering. So when I point out this kind of definition, or when I point out that pornography isn't just sex, but it's also about discrimination and inequality, there are some people who say that that's unfair. They say, you're just taking the worst examples of porn, or you're just looking at the bad aspects of porn, and you're making that, you're generalizing that onto all of porn and saying it's all bad. And they say, it doesn't have to be sexist, it can be whatever people make it to be. But one of the things that I want to share with you today in this presentation is that there actually is a lot of sexism in porn through various themes, and I'm going to give specific examples of what I'm talking about. And I think part of the reason why sometimes we don't notice just how much sexism there is in porn is because we're used to it. We're used to thinking about women in certain ways, used to thinking about sexuality in certain ways, and so it doesn't jump out at us that this is actually really cruel and really sexist sometimes. So I'm just going to break down the word first. The word pornography comes from two Greek words, porne and graphos. So porne referred to a category of prostitutes in ancient Greece, and it was actually a very specific class of prostitutes. It wasn't all prostitutes, it was basically women who were sex slaves. They were considered the lowest, the cheapest that you could buy with money. They had absolutely no rights, unlike certain other classes of prostitutes in ancient Greece. They were basically human trash, and they were for sale, and you could do whatever you wanted with them. And then graphos means writing or sketching. So if you put the two together, there's two sort of definitions that you can get. One is drawings, and I'm sorry about the language, drawings of filthy whores. I'm using that language because I think it accurately represents the misogyny and the hatred that was expressed towards these women. So one definition is drawing of filthy whores. And the second definition is because pornography, especially modern-day pornography, often, I think for a lot of boys, it's becoming a form of sex education. The second definition that I've put is women in general being depicted as filthy whores. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think that some men and boys who watch pornography apply what they see and what they learn from it onto their own relationships and onto all women, and we're going to talk about that as well in a bit. So I just want you to keep this sort of this idea in mind, where what the word actually means, because if porn really was this neutral, general, sexual thing, just neutral depictions of sexuality, there are a lot of other things it could have been called. It could have been anything else. There's a lot of words that it could have come from. But I think the fact that the words come from where it does, even that is a bit of a clue as to what the industry and what the genre have always kind of been about. So in the Civil Rights Ordinance that I mentioned before, they gave 7 or 8 specific examples and definitions of how pornography can make women or other people, like men or children that are used in porn, how it can make them unequal. And I've sort of grouped them together based on themes. And I've added some graphic examples from actual pornography to show what it is that we're talking about. So there are going to be a few potentially upsetting photos that I'm going to share with you right now. I just want to give you that warning. And I also just want to say, all of these images, everything that I'm sharing with you right now is from mainstream pornography. It's things that 11-year-old boys can find within seconds by doing a Google search. These aren't, the most extreme examples that we've picked out to make some kind of dramatic point. So the first one reads, women are presented dehumanized as sexual objects, things, or commodities, or women's body parts, including but not limited to vaginas, breasts, or buttocks, are exhibited such that women are reduced to those parts. So this basically deals with objectification, and that means treating people like things. This is an example that some of you might be familiar with. It's not from, quote unquote, the porn industry, but I'm using it because I think it'll be more relatable to a lot of us. So with objectification, with things like this, or if you look at like old Playboy centerfolds, for example, where they cut out and it's just like the woman's breasts and it's just that. Basically what you have is a body part, and that's pretty much it. You don't, in most cases, I mean, in this case, Nicki Minaj is famous, but in most pornography, you don't know who the woman is, what she likes or doesn't like sexually, if she would ever want to have sex with any of the men who are masturbating to her. You know, you don't know anything about her. You don't have any way to establish a human connection or a human relationship with her. It's literally just a butt or, you know, a pair of breasts that's put in your face, and, you know, you can masturbate to that. And, you know, in a lot of modern day pornography, they'll ejaculate onto a woman's face, onto her breasts, onto her butt, but it's just like body parts that you're using, and you're not forming any kind of connection with this woman or this person on a human level. And the reason why that's problematic is because if you don't form a human connection with someone, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but if you don't have any way of relating to them, any way of talking to them, then it's kind of like there's no accountability for what you do to them. You can't make sure that they're consenting, for example. Their feelings and desires and preferences become irrelevant. You can basically do whatever you want to them and get away with it. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why some men watch very violent, disturbing pornography that has things they would never do in real life, and they don't even see that as problematic, or they don't feel bad about that, because they don't see the way that women are presented in pornography. You're not encouraged to see these women as, regular women. You're encouraged to see them as a butt, a piece of breasts, whatever. This is actually Sasha Grey. Some of you may know her. She's a fairly famous porn star. And so it says, women are presented in postures or positions of sexual submission, servility, or display. So in a lot of pornography, women are portrayed as very passive. They're lying there in very passive ways, and it's the men who do things to them. They're not often active participants. So, next slide. Women are presented as sexual objects who enjoy humiliation or pain, or women are presented as sexual objects experiencing sexual pleasure in rape, incest, or other sexual assault, or women are presented as sexual objects tied up or cut up or mutilated or bruised or physically hurt. So basically all of these deal with making pain sexy, hurting women something that might seem sexy to men. So this image has also been censored. It's from, there's a lot of porn nowadays where women have penises thrust very aggressively and violently down their throats, and sometimes this is done on purpose until they start vomiting or crying. And as you can see from her, expression, this is actually Vanessa Belmont. She's a survivor who's worked and volunteered with antipornography.org. As you can see from her expression, she's crying, her mascara is running a bit, she's in pain, she's not really enjoying herself, but as a consumer of pornography, what we're supposed to believe is that either it doesn't matter that she's in pain, or worse, that she likes being in pain, and that's what women like. And so the next picture is a man, quote-unquote, raping a girl who looks underage. Now, we don't actually know if this girl is underage or if she's an 18, 19, whatever-year-old who's just been made to look like a child. It could be either. But for us as consumers, what we're supposed to be getting excited about is this idea of a man forcing a girl who's too small, too weak, too vulnerable to resist. And it's this, forcing her that's supposed to be sexy. So I just want to talk a bit about this for a second, because what we've seen in the past 10 to 20 years is that there's been a huge increase in child pornography. It's actually one of the fastest growing genres. It's either the first or second fastest growing genres of pornography. And child pornography is something that everybody agrees is bad. But even if you look in mainstream pornography, there's often something called teen porn, and it's often 18 to, let's say, 21-year-old women, and they're made to look younger. So they're sort of infantilized, sometimes they're surrounded by toys in a bedroom to make them look like children. And so what we've seen, especially in the past 10 to 20 years, is that men who consume pornography on a regular basis eventually get tired with the regular adult pornography that they've been consuming. So they start getting into this teen, quote-unquote teen porn. And it's more exciting because it's more of a thrill, this idea of forcing someone who can't resist. And what's actually been happening is that men who were never pedophiles before and never interested in children before have actually gone from regular porn to quote-unquote teen porn to actually downloading child porn and in some cases sexually assaulting children. There have been interviews with pedophiles and child rapists in jail who have said that they were never sexually attracted to children until they got into the slippery slope that led to child pornography, and then they felt like they had to act out their fantasy because that was the only way to get that next thrill that they were seeking. So I just wanted to mention that because we tend to think of child porn and adult porn as like completely categorically different, and in some ways, of course, they are. But I think it's important to understand how these things are also sometimes connected and how one can fuel the other and how they bleed into one another. So for our next slide, we have women are presented being penetrated by objects or animals, or women are presented in scenarios of degradation, humiliation, injury, torture, shown as filthy or inferior, bleeding, bruised, or hurt in a context that makes these conditions sexual. So with these two, the theme is sort of humiliating women and also making quote-unquote dirty things sexy. So we have two pictures here. The first one is the cover of a porn DVD, and it says "Filthy Office Sluts." And so there isn't anything visually that's particularly shocking about this cover, but the reason I wanted to include it is because I think the language is very revealing. In a lot of porn, women are called filthy, dirty, and that in the porn world, that's almost like a synonym for sexy and hot. And I just think it's interesting that they choose that language instead of saying just, these women are sexy, they're hot, but they choose specifically words like sluts, whores, filthy whores, cum dumpsters, like very debasing, insulting language. In the second picture, we have a woman and a man is peeing into her mouth. This is also something that's becoming more popular. Porn in which women are urinated on, sometimes even defecated on. A much more, an even more popular thing is women being ejaculated onto. So on their face, on their breasts, things like that. That's extremely common in porn. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with that. And in case you're wondering, how do we know that having somebody ejaculate on your face is humiliating? What if some of these women like that? What if they're into that? This is Bill Margold. He's a porn producer, and he has a quote that I actually want to share with you about this topic. He says, quote, "I'd like to really show what I believe the men want to see, violence against women. I firmly believe that we serve a purpose by showing that. The most violent we can get is the cum shot in the face. Men get off behind that because they get even with the women they can't have." So I think sometimes when you look at the language, whether it's on websites, on porn, DVDs, the things that pornographers and porn producers themselves are saying, I think they're actually very clear about how they see women and what they're all about. They're not usually ambiguous. They don't try to hide it and say, we're really these nice guys who treat women in this lovely way. And just quickly again on this topic of language, one of the things that pornography does very successfully is that it convinces to some extent the consumer, especially the male consumer, that the women in porn are somewhat different from normal women, from their mothers, their sisters, their girlfriends. These women are often portrayed as these nymphomaniacs who love lots and lots of rough sex, who can never get enough of it. And so that makes it seem not as bad to treat them roughly or, do things like that. And I think it's just important to remember that these women are just as human as any other woman. There is no magical woman who enjoys being penetrated by 4 men at the same time. So basically, the general theme of pornography is making inequality sexy and focusing on women, but again, you can apply a lot of these themes to gay porn, to children, to transgender people, and so on. And from a feminist point of view, this is what makes porn different from erotica, because people sometimes ask, where do you draw the line? What's porn? What's erotica? So if sex is represented in a more neutral way, if everybody is really fully participating, if they really are fully into it, fully chose to be there, if nobody is being put down or treated cruelly, that would be erotica. So an example would be a lot of nude drawings. There's some homemade porn as well porn that would fall into this definition of erotica. But at the end of the day, it's pornography and not erotica that's really selling, that's being downloaded en masse on the internet, that's becoming part of pop culture. It's things like quote-unquote rape porn and skull fucking that get a lot of Google hits. It's not things like couple gently making love. So I think that's what we need to focus on and be aware of and pay attention to. So just to go back in time a little bit, just by a show of hands, does everybody recognize this symbol? It's probably one of the most famous corporate logos in the world. So this is obviously the Playboy bunny. And the porn industry as a whole, which is mostly on the internet these days, is worth more than $97 billion a year. That's more than Facebook, Twitter, and I think YouTube and several other large companies combined. So it's absolutely enormous. And I don't think that's really new for a lot of people here. I know myself, I grew up with the internet, and for our generation, pornography is kind of like oxygen. It's just everywhere. It's just the way things are. We're so used to it. But the modern porn industry is actually only about 60 years old, which in the grand scheme of things isn't all that much. Like politically and historically, 60 years is not really a long time. And I think one of the reasons why porn has really grown and become popular in a very short amount of time is because it draws on some very old misogyny. So just to sort of go over how we got to where we are right now. In the 1950s, a lot of men in North America were coming home from war, and a lot of women had taken up jobs during the war, which was uncommon then, because they had to support their families with the men gone. And so when the men got back, they found women had taken a lot of their places at the workplace. And keep in mind, this was a fairly conservative time. A lot of men felt, I guess, threatened, not very pleased about that. They felt like they needed to be the man of the house, but if you have to compete with women in the workplace, that makes it more difficult. So politically and socially, there was this push to get women back into the kitchen and performing their traditional roles as mothers and wives. So there are a lot of vintage sexist ads. You can find some on the internet even. I just chose to share one with you just to give you some idea of the culture at this time. So this is a tie for ads, and it says, "Show her it's a man's world," and it shows a woman serving a man. So, it's pretty sexist. It's putting women down. I'm also not sure how it's related to ties, to be honest, but it just shows you a bit of the mentality at this time. And also, because this was a conservative time, it was before the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. So, for example, if people had sex outside of marriage, they didn't talk about it. So, a very different world in some ways from what we live in now. And so, in that kind of climate, a man named Hugh Hefner, who you can see here, started a magazine called Playboy, which was one of the first pornographic magazines. And in 1953, in his very first ever magazine, he wrote, quote, "If you are a man between 18 and 80, Playboy is meant for you. We want to make it clear, we aren't a family magazine. If you are a woman and pick this up by mistake, please pass this along to the man in your life and get back to the ladies' home companion." So at this time, because it was conservative and basically everything at this time was about the family, especially the white middle-class straight family, saying that you're not a family magazine was almost blasphemous. And so Playboy and then other magazines like Hustler did two things that made them successful and that allowed them to grow. The first thing that they capitalized on was breaking sexual and social norms. So, they presented themselves as something you know, kind of like this is taboo, and when you say that something is taboo, everybody suddenly wants to know what it's about, they want to see it. It's kind of like the forbidden fruit syndrome, as I call it. So that was one thing they capitalized on. The second thing was this cultural resentment that many men had towards women at the time for, you know, taking their jobs during the war, and therefore, in their eyes, kind of emasculating them. So the second thing was kind of this cultural thing about getting back at women. And both Hugh Hefner, who, as we discussed, started the Playboy magazine, and other pornographers like Larry Flint, they tapped into both of those things very early on. So I'm just going to show you a few quick photos. The first one says, it shows a man sort of overpowering a woman, and it says, "Let's face it, guys, some women are just begging for rough treatment. They whine, they nag, they sass you back when you give them an order. There's just one thing to do. Give them what they deserve." And then it's been very blurred, but it's a woman who's very tied up and her genitals are sort of on display. And it says, "She won't open her legs for you, will she? Well, now they're open, and she can't close them. Serves her right for all the times she's teased you. Now you can do anything to her, and she can't resist." So in both of these are both from very like early pornography. There's this kind of like almost resentment against women, like how dare they say no to anything, how dare they talk back, how dare they do whatever, and it's kind of like, it's almost promoting pornography, and especially violent pornography, as a response and saying, you know, just be rough to them and shut them up that way. This is an old video game. It's called Custer's Revenge. And it's a video game where white men go around and shoot and rape indigenous women. So not only is it problematic because it's promoting rape, which is misogynistic, but it's actually also racist because there's actually a long history of when white settlers came to the Americas, there were a lot of indigenous women at times who were raped. And this is sort of tapping into that history and making it seem sexy and fun and making it seem like a game. So porn in general had this misogynistic theme, you know, almost from the start. And over the next few decades, it grew and grew and grew. And I think in the 80s, when videos and VHS cassettes were a huge thing, that also helped it expand. And of course, in the 90s, there was the internet that helped it expand as well. And there's many reasons why it took off the way they did. One reason was that the pornographers worked very hard to promote porn as something mainstream, acceptable. They fought off many First Amendment laws. They fought off many censorship laws. But the other reason, and probably the bigger piece of the pie, is the fact that a lot of consumers, especially male consumers, got into it and created a demand for it. And so a lot of men loved, and unfortunately still do love, watching women being hurt for their pleasure. So there's a feminist writer named Susan Hawthorne who made a really interesting argument. She said that if you look at lynching in the US, for example, it reached its zenith around the 1910s and 1920s, so just a few decades after slavery was abolished. And she shows how historically, when slavery was abolished, there was almost this paranoia amongst white people about what's going to happen next. What are African Americans going to do? Are they going to come into our neighborhoods? You know, are they going to change the way we live? Are they going to try to change laws? Things like that. So whenever you have a hierarchy with one group on top of the other, the people who are on top usually are very nervous and not happy about the idea of real equality between themselves and the people below them. Historically, many privileged groups have fought against equality for the other group. They've often fought to stay in their sort of superior position. And so when slavery was abolished, you saw this with African Americans. And one of the things that it led to was an enormous amount of lynching and violence. It was almost like, let's get them before they get us kind of paranoia. And when lynchings were going on and when they were actually popular, There were times when entire families would come out and watch and point and laugh and sometimes even bring food. It was almost like a picnic kind of event. It was very gruesome and a very cruel way of sort of laughing at another person or another group suffering. So this feminist writer that I mentioned, Susan Hawthorne, her theory is that, or her argument is that, pornography is kind of like women lynching. And before I get into explaining why she says that, I just want to say every historical event and every historical atrocity has its own particular things, particular cruelties, particular details. So I'm not saying that these two things are exactly the same, and I'm not trying to trivialize the lynching of African Americans or trivialize the suffering that went on. But she argues that porn is women lynching in two senses. One, in the sense that it's punishing women for being part of this group called women, or a second-class group. And it's also, secondly, punishing women for getting, quote-unquote, too close. So her argument is that in the past few decades, there have been a lot of changes to society. Women work a lot more now. We have more opportunities for education. There are a lot of other things that have changed and that we can do that we couldn't do before. And so remember what I said about privileged groups not being happy when the group below them gets too close or too equal. Is everyone here familiar with Anita Sarkeesian and with what happened? Okay, so Anita Sarkeesian is, she's a gamer and also a media critic. She analyzes a lot of video games from a feminist perspective, and she shows how sometimes there's sexist stereotypes, things like that. So she, at one point, started a Kickstarter to get some money so that she could buy, play, and then review certain games. And it was, she wasn't threatening anybody. She was just saying, I want to do this. If you want to help me, great. If you don't, also great. And she basically got an enormous amount of death and rape threats. This has been ongoing for more than a year now. There was even one man who created a video game where you can beat up Anita Sarkeesian, and every time you click on it, it keeps beating up her face until she's basically beaten to a pulp. So she just got an extremely vicious backlash. And just recently, she actually had to leave her home because one of the people who was threatening her had her address. So this has been like an ongoing problem, and it's been in the media a lot, and on Twitter and YouTube, there's been a lot of things about this. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because video games and the gaming community used to be very male-dominated. A lot of video games until recently were made for guys. There was this very masculine culture around it. And now 47% of gamers are female, and there's also an increase in women and girls who are not just playing video games, but also want strong female characters, who want sexism taken out of video games. And one person, I can't remember their name, unfortunately, was talking about this Anita Sarkeesian thing, and they were saying maybe the reason she's getting this aggressive backlash is because she's threatening this traditionally male-dominated space. And so I'm just using this as an example of any time that somebody from a less privileged group is perceived as a threat to a more privileged group, there's often this vicious backlash. And so Susan Hawthorne's argument is that pornography, in some ways, is part of this cultural backlash against women, that because women have gone into the workplace, we've gone into schools, we've gone to some extent into government, we're a lot more visible than we used to be. We can make more demands about our own interests now. She argues that some men subconsciously see that as a threat, and that pornography, and especially some of the resentment and misogyny in pornography, is kind of like a way of getting back. So I want to share another quote from a pornographer. His name is Paul Heskey, and he says, this is him talking about why anal sex is so popular in porn. And he says, essentially, it comes from every man who's unhappily married, and he looks at his wife who just nagged at him about this or that or whatnot, and he says, I'd like to fuck you in the ass. He's angry at her, right? And he can't. So he would rather watch some girl taking it up the ass and fantasize. And that is the attraction. So this is just one of many examples of the kind of resentment that's against women that's popular in a lot of pornography. Mainstream pornography is also getting more extreme. There's more violence even in mainstream pornography. It used to be that only S&M type videos had hitting or slapping in them, but now even a lot of, quote unquote vanilla mainstream pornography has hitting, slapping. There was one study I think that found that more than 80% or more than 90% of straight porn has a man or a group of men doing some kind of violence to the woman on the screen. So there's also been a lot of research about how porn affects consumers, and especially male consumers. There's decades of research to show that male consumers, especially who watch porn and violent porn, get desensitized to it, and they're more likely to become sexually aggressive. For female consumers of porn, they also tend to get desensitized to it, but we don't live in a society where girls are taught to be aggressive, whether it's sexually or otherwise, and so women don't usually become more sexually aggressive from watching porn because there's no larger social thing to reinforce that, whereas with men and boys, they often learn from a young age that being aggressive or dominant is part of who they are as men, that it's part of masculinity. And so when they watch porn or violent porn, it just reinforces what they've learned over a lifetime. So this is Ed Donnerstein. He's done and also looked at decades of research about pornography and its effects on consumers. And he says, quote, "Good colleagues of mine would argue that the relationship between pornography and subsequent aggression and changes in attitudes towards women is much stronger statistically than the relationship between smoking and lung cancer." And in fact, the evidence has been so strong at times that universities have actually not allowed further research on the topic. So just to explain what that means, if a study is known or likely to have detrimental effects on the people that are being studied, and if those effects are not reversible, ethics boards at universities will sometimes say, "We're sorry, we can't approve of this because it's just too dangerous and we can't go ahead with this." So this has happened multiple times in pornography where ethics boards have said we can't fund more research but we can't approve more research on this topic because the evidence is so strong, and exposing men to more pornography or violent pornography is going to have effects that we can't undo, that we can't go ahead with this. So, and some people, especially in my experience, men who want to defend their porn use, will say that, what we see doesn't necessarily affect how we behave, that we're smart enough to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. We're not that stupid. But, to quote the sociologist Gail Dines, if what we see doesn't affect our behavior, then why do companies spend millions of dollars on advertising, right? Like, companies will spend millions of dollars to get a 30-second commercial at the Super Bowl because they know a lot of people are going to see that, and some people will be inspired to buy something because of that. But somehow we're supposed to believe that decades of watching pornography is not going to affect how people, and especially men in this culture, see sex. I think it's also important just to distinguish between commercials and something like pornography. So when you're watching a commercial, you might like what you see, you might think, I'd like to buy that at some point, you might get a good feeling. But with pornography, you're not just passively watching and saying, okay, whatever, you're actually masturbating to it, and you're doing something where you're getting a physical feeling, you're physically reacting to it, you're having an orgasm at some point. And it, in terms of the effect on the brain, it creates a much stronger, memory in the body than if you just watch a commercial passively. And it ties sexual pleasure to cruelty or to discrimination or to domination in a much stronger way than if you just saw some random commercial. So I just want to talk about sex trafficking very briefly. I think that pornography, apart from what I've mentioned about the research, I think it's had a detrimental effect in convincing men and boys especially that they're entitled to sex and entitled to women's bodies. Some of you might be familiar with the Elliot Rodger shooting that happened just a few months ago. He went on a rampage because he felt that he wasn't getting sex or relationships from women, and he felt entitled to that. He wrote a very long manifesto about how women are hurting him by refusing to sleep with him. And I think pornography has done a lot in the way of convincing men that they're entitled to that they're entitled to sex, to women's bodies. And I think that there's a connection between that and something like sex trafficking. I'm not saying that somebody who watches porn is going to go out and start trafficking women. Obviously, it's not that simple. But if you feel that you're entitled to have sex with another person, if you feel that that's your right and that they owe you that no matter what, there aren't going to be enough women and children going into this voluntarily, and we'll talk a bit about that later as well. There aren't going to be enough people going in by themselves to meet that demand, because there's always more and more demand for more entitlement, and some people have to be sex trafficked to meet that demand. There are traffickers and pimps who say, I don't actually enjoy this, I'm not a sexually cruel person, I'm just making money and this is profitable. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because sex trafficking is something that everyone understands is bad, and we don't often think of the connection between things like that and pornography. So today, with the internet and with cell phones, boys as young as 10 are starting to watch porn, sometimes even younger, and this is sort of shaping how they see sex even before they get their own opportunity to form their own feelings or their own thoughts about it. So there have actually been some men speaking out about how it's influenced them and how it's influenced their sexuality. They talk about how sometimes they get so used to it that they can't get aroused without it. They feel like they need it. And sometimes they get so desensitized to it that they can't get aroused at all anymore. We actually have a page on our website, antipornography.org, called the Harms page, and there's all kinds of different people sharing their stories about how porn has influenced them. If you want to check that out, there's a lot there. So this is a book called Pornland, and this is Gail Dines. She's an anti-porn speaker, writer, and she's also a sociologist. And there are some quotes in her book about men speaking up about how this has affected their sexuality. So one guy named Andy says, "When we have sex," meaning with his girlfriend, "I try not to think of scenes from porn that I like. And then I feel guilty because I can't help myself when I do think about that. I feel like shit because she doesn't even know I watch porn." And then Tony, another guy, says, "I hope she never knows what's going through my mind when we have sex. She'd hate me." So these are just examples also of how these fantasies can start popping up when they're trying to have sex and they're not even trying to think about porn, and how it just takes over how they relate to people sexually, how they imagine sexuality. And one last thing that I want to mention about men and pornography is that as pornography has become mainstream and as it's grown, child-on-child rape has gone through the roof. There have been many cases of 6, 8, 10-year-old boys raping or sexually assaulting either other boys or their sisters or other girls, because they were copying something that they saw in porn. And they're not, at that age, they're not even mature enough to understand what sexuality is. And I would imagine they probably, in some cases, don't even understand what they're doing. But that's the power of things like this, that even for boys who are that young and who don't have their own ideas about sexuality, they can be influenced to do something like that. So what about the women in pornography? There are a lot of people who say it's a choice. These women are getting paid. If they were unhappy, they would leave. Maybe they just like this kind of sex. So there's been a lot of research about this, and there have been a lot of survivors speaking out as well. We know that poverty is one big factor for a lot of women getting into porn, and women in general in this society tend to be poorer than men, but a lot of the women in porn tend to be extremely poor. Some of them didn't even graduate from high school. They're usually not women who have had a lot of opportunities in society. This is Nina Hartley. She's a porn performer, and she tends to be pro-porn. She does a lot of public speaking and other things. And she's from a more middle-class background. She's one of the few exceptions in the porn industry, and her entire experience in the industry has been really atypical. But even she, in a documentary, had this to say about other women in porn. They don't know how to do anything else. They don't know how to do retail. They don't know how to do Excel spreadsheets. Many people in adult entertainment are not suited for 9-to-5 work. So this is somebody even who defends pornography admitting that these are people who usually don't have other options. And I don't know if any of you here are familiar with Belle Knox. She's a woman that's been all over the media recently. She's a young woman who got into porn. And she's a student, I think, at Duke University. She's from a very wealthy background. And she's been talking about how she loves being in porn, how she chose to do it, how she could do other things, but she just loves sex, and that's why she's into it. But as I said, the women like this are the exception and not the rule. And also, this is a picture from one of the first porn shoots that she ever did. It was with a website called facialabuse.com. You can actually find a slightly shorter clip on the internet, like 2 minutes. And I would actually encourage everybody to look that up. If you watch it, it makes everything she says sound so ridiculous about how she loves this, about how she's having a great time. She was in tears in that scene. She was, almost passing out. She was there was literally nothing in her body and on her face that expressed any kind of pleasure. So I think some of the images and some of the videos speak for themselves. So in case you're wondering, these women are poor, why can't they just get degrees and find other jobs? Sometimes they can. There have been individual cases of that happening, but it's very hard. Because we live in a sexist society, a lot of women in general sometimes have a harder time making a living compared to men. And in every aspect of society, whether it's the media, in movies, in music, in everyday life, women are often valued as sex objects. I'm sure that a lot of women in this room have felt that at some point. There's a lot of pressure on us to be sexually available all the time. So women get paid more money to strip and have sex either with men or on camera. More money than we get paid to nurse, to teach, to flip veggie burgers, to do almost any other job. And as long as that's true, there are going to be women who have to sell sex to survive. As long as the sex industry pays more, and as long as, in general, there's a lot of economic discrimination against women, for some women, their only choice is going to be in the sex industry. That's, their only way to survive. So another element for a lot of women, not all of them, but the estimates vary from 60 to 90%, is childhood sexual abuse. So many of the women in porn have experienced that even before getting into porn. And for them, the abuse that they experience in childhood is a grooming process. So they learn either that men show love through violence or that they exist to sexually please men. And so when you combine that with often poverty, lack of education, lack of other opportunities, porn starts to look appealing because it hits home for them. It's what they've learned. So this is Vanessa Belmont. I mentioned her earlier. She's a speaker and volunteer and a survivor with antipornography.org. And this is something that she told me in an interview that we did. She wrote, quote, "I never met any woman that had a professional career and left it to go into porn just for fun. Many got into it because of financial desperation. Many also had abusive childhoods. I had a roommate who had been on the streets prostituting herself since the age of 14, and by the time she got into porn at 18, it was all she knew. So then there's actually being in porn. There's the poverty and often child sexual abuse that gets them there. But once they're there, they have to survive it somehow. For a lot of women, they use a lot of drugs and alcohol and psychological disassociation to get through a lot of the acts. They basically have to pretend that they're not there. This is Jenny Case. She's another survivor. She's not with our organization, but she's also said some great things. So Vanessa, who is with us, said, quote, "I did coke occasionally, but I was mostly a drinker. And then I got into painkillers. Those are really popular in the industry, especially for women that do a lot of anal. And I smoked a whole lot of weed too. I wouldn't have been able to do porn otherwise." And then Jenny Case, that's the woman you just saw, she said in a video, quote, "There was always drugs or alcohol. You can't do that stuff sober." So I think, that already says something about the treatment in the industry, about some of the acts that these women have to go through. If you need an enormous amount of drugs just to survive it. I'm going to play a video now that was put together by another survivor. Everything is kind of blurred, so you can't see any graphic nudity, but it is emotionally disturbing. So if anybody wants to step out of the room, feel free.
Most of the movies are filmed in private locations where male porn directors are controlling the work environment on a mostly male set.
Yeah, it's too much.
Okay.
Oh my god, this is so please, it's really hurting me.
Guys, I don't do ATMs.
Oh.
It's so much, it's so much. It hurts.
Oh, what's the matter? Poor baby. Here.
Fuck! Oh, get the out of my butt!
Here. You alright?
No, I'm not okay! No, catch all this on camera!
What happened?
God, no!
So, as you partly saw in that video, and I'm going to talk more about this, there's also a lot of abuse that goes on in the industry. And that can take various forms. Sometimes women are lied to about what they're going to be doing. They're told one thing and then they get on set and they're forced to do things that are different or much more extreme. There's a lot of pressure to do really extreme things like, anal, gangbangs, multiple penetrations, because that's where the money is nowadays. And if you're not willing to do that, you can't even get any work at all after a couple of months in the porn industry. So, keeping in mind that many of these women don't have a lot of other economic options, that kind of forces them into these things that they would never otherwise do. And then sometimes also they're given an idea of what they're going to be doing on set, but it's misleading or it doesn't tell the whole story. So this is Cameron Bay. She's a survivor of porn who recently got HIV. There was a recent outbreak of HIV in the porn industry that caused a huge kerfuffle. And she talked about her experience with one porn company called kink.com. They do a lot of extreme BDSM porn. So here's what she had to say. "Despite signing paperwork and a checklist of do's and don'ts, I was in way over my head. What I thought I was agreeing to felt a lot different in reality. I was groped by hands I didn't know. There were masked people everywhere, but only the ones wearing wristbands were my approved scene partners. If I balked at an act or found it difficult to perform, I was punished for my defiance, which is the nature of the BDSM scene. I met my breaking point in this particular scene. Halfway through, I had to be untied and calmed down. I was shaking. I felt a catch in my throat when I tried to speak, and I could barely keep the tears at bay. I felt like I'd been beat. Yet I was hugged, inundated with compliments, and told how strong I was for being on the receiving end. I was caned, electrically prodded, and slapped around. I didn't feel powerful. In the interim, I had to decide whether I was going to quit or be a professional and finish the scene. After everything I had gone through, leaving would have made it worthless. So I stayed. So this happens fairly regularly, where women aren't always given a realistic picture of what they're getting into, and then because they usually don't get paid if they don't finish the scene, and because many of them lack other financial options, they're often forced into these things. So it's really, if you think about it, a form of rape, in my opinion, because it's not, you can't give meaningful consent to something that you aren't warned about in advance and that you can't opt out of. If you're not allowed to say no, then that's not a meaningful choice. So there's another video that I want to play. This one is a bit longer, and it's also outtakes from pornography, similar to the other video, but it focuses on two women in particular, and you're not actually going to see what's happening with the actors, you're just going to see a still, but you're going to hear the conversation. And again, this video is actually, in my opinion, much more disturbing than the last one, so if anybody wants to walk out for a couple of minutes,
You don't have any shame over that, do you?
No, I don't.
Why?
Because what fucking shame should I have? What I'm doing is what I'm doing. I'm not doing it to please anybody else.
What are you doing it for?
For myself, because I like to.
Yeah, why do you like it?
Because I like it. It's a rise out of people.
No, there's a reason for it.
Okay, please tell me what the reason is.
You need the attention, kid.
I need the attention?
Yeah.
Okay.
You need the attention.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. I need the attention.
You really do.
Oh, yes, I do.
You have taken Mommy's little girl and turned her into a piece of shit whore because you need the attention.
Yeah.
Isn't that true?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it?
Uh-huh. That's true.
Ask Mommy if she's proud of you. Ask her.
Are you proud of me?
Mom, tell her. Do it. Put your hands down. Do not move your hands. Okay? Ask Mom if she's proud of you.
Mom, are you proud of me?
Yeah. Proud of you, little angel?
Are you proud of your little
Yeah,
angel?
she only went to medical school, right?
Only.
You could have gone to medical school, couldn't you? Did that hurt, honey?
No.
Then why do you... Oh, good, that's better. Do you want more? Huh? Huh? Do you want more?
That's enough.
Okay, that is enough. That's exactly right. Did anybody ever choke you out during sex? Do you like it? Tell me the truth. Do you like it, Angel? You gotta tell me. Oh, do you want more or not? Do you want me to let go? Say please? Okay. All right. Yeah, the fucking smile comes back. I fucking hate you. Close your eyes. I hate you. Do you know that? You know why? You're just another fucking pretty girl. I didn't get to slap you in the face, did I? That's it. Fight back, you piece of shit. That's it. Yeah, remember... What did you say, honey? I didn't hear you. Look in the camera, tell me. What did you say? Look in the camera, tell me!
Not my face.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we had a set of rules that was part of the bargain.
Okay,
remember?
that was just not that hard. Please, not as hard as you slap my ass.
I'm gonna fucking hit you if I can, because I'm fucking pissed off at you. Okay? Put your hands behind your back. Let's just get this over with, okay? Okay? Let's just get this over with, okay? Huh? Did Dad hit you when you were young? Did your daddy hit you? Did your daddy hit you? Then why do you like it?
I don't like being hit on my face.
You look like you do.
No, I don't.
Oh, no, it looks like you're having a great time. It's like, put your hands behind your back. You know, I gotta explain something to you. I'm sick of fucking eye rolls, do you hear me? Fucking eye rolls. Fuck you.
You make girls cry. Do you feel good about yourself?
What's the only way I can get an erection?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Then you must be a real sick fuck, aren't you? You like to beat the shit out of people, don't you?
Well, there's been a rumor to that effect,
Oh,
yes.
yeah. You like to see girls get all their panties in a bundle and cry.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And you like to laugh around.
Yeah, I do. But what are you?
What am I?
Yeah.
I'm a whore for hire.
You're a piece of shit, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I got good news for you. Now you get to earn your living now.
Yeah?
Eating asshole and sucking cock and drinking cum.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
That's all I'm good for.
What's that?
They all like it. They always like it. They always like my pussy.
Yeah.
They always want to fuck it. Why not? My fucking pussy's for hire, you know?
Yeah.
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 Are you happy, Angel?
I'm not fucking happy.
Why not, sweetie?
I'm not fucking happy.
Why
Do you
not?
think I want to be fucking like this? Do you think I want to be your meat toy? Do you think I want this? This is what I am. This is what I fucking am.
You proud?
No.
Oh.
No, I hate myself.
Oh.
I hate everything I am. I hate myself.
Say, look, Daddy. Look, Daddy, what a whore I am. What the fuck you turned me into? The fuck you turned me into? Look at Please keep going, keep going. Please keep.
Ask him, whore.
What do you feel right now watching this? Damn you.
Let me hear it, whore.
Damn you fucking all.
They had to turn into a whore for their pleasure, didn't they? Didn't they, honey? Huh? Is that what happened, Angel?
Yes. Yes.
Ask them if they're happy.
Are you fucking happy? Because this is what you got.
And so what you just saw with those two scenes and with the earlier video, these aren't some kind of extremely rare exceptions. There have been many survivors speaking out saying that they suffered this kind of thing many times and that other people they knew also had things like this happen to them multiple times. So, you know, we live in a society with this massive, massive industry that hurts women, sometimes tortures them, sometimes rapes them for public entertainment. And we're so used to this that a lot of times we don't even see anything wrong with it. We're sometimes told that porn is some kind of sexual freedom. It's heavily glamorized in the media. It's also used, for example, in human sexuality and medical courses to teach people about the human body. And it is very, very, very big business. We need a mass movement working to stop porn culture. I know that sounds overwhelming, maybe impossible, because of how big it is and how pervasive. But you know, people also once thought the same thing about African American slavery, you know, and here we are today, a few centuries later. Censorship isn't going to stop pornography, it isn't going to address the issue, but there are other things we can do. I mentioned the civil rights ordinances at the beginning of my presentation, and that was a piece of legislation written by feminists in the 80s. It addressed pornography as a form of violence against women and discrimination against women. And one of the key things about it was that it would have allowed women to sue for damages if they had been hurt or abused by a pornographer. And also women who aren't in porn, just regular women like us, if a woman was raped and she could prove that her rapist was in some way inspired by porn, she could also sue for damages. So if we had a serious movement, a mass movement, there are many, many other things that we could also think of, create, work on. I think the important thing and the key is to seeing this as a violence against women issue and start from there. You know, a lot of times we're told that the only problem with pornography is the nudity, and if you're okay with nudity and you're okay with sex, you should be okay with pornography. And it's a very sort of simplistic way of thinking about the issue, and it doesn't speak to the reality of what I've just shared with you and the reality that many women have been through in pornography. So there are a couple of things that I just want to quickly mention. First of all, if what I've said today makes sense to you, if you agree with what I've said, and you're still watching porn, please stop, as the very first thing. There are some resources on one of those sheets about how to quit pornography if you think you're addicted or if you need some kind of support to do it. There are a lot of resources. You know, do whatever it takes, but you need to stop. The second thing is, if you're already not watching porn or if you've stopped, we need to spread the word. So if you have a friend, a brother, sister, girlfriend, boyfriend, anybody you know who's watching porn, talk to them, you know, educate them, share some of your thoughts and feelings. You know, I think it's important to spread the word for two reasons. One is to reduce demand, which is important because if there's less demand, less porn will be made. And the second thing is also to build a mass movement, which we don't really have right now and which we need. Thirdly, we need to be noticing that this is the only choice that a lot of women have, and we need to care about that and we need to address that. We need to address women's poverty and economic discrimination against women in a way that isn't just about wealthy white women getting more CEO positions. So I would actually suggest a new standard for talking about women's poverty, which is we ask, where are the poorest women? Where are the most marginalized women? Do they have meaningful choices? Are they happy? Are they, you know, doing well? And if there's one single woman who's struggling anywhere, then we have work left to do as feminists and as caring human beings. You know, we can have as many female CEOs as we want, but if there are other women who have to scrub toilets or have to sell their bodies to just barely survive, then we have work left to do. Fourth, we need to be reaching out to women who are already in the industry. We need to be helping them get out if and when they're ready. And I think our organization, antipornography.org, has been doing a great job of that. If you go to our website, we have all kinds of survivors speaking out and sharing their stories with us. The women who have been in porn have seen how this works. They know what's going on. They have things to say that are worthwhile and that we should listen to. And I think also we need to be careful about listening to all survivors of porn. Right now there's 1 or 2% of women, the Bell Knoxes and the Nina Hartleys of the world, who are in a relatively privileged position and they have way more access to the media than most of these women. And they have a very different experience from most women. And so they go on TV and they say, I love it, it's my choice, I'm having a great time. But most of the women in the industry live in a completely different universe from these women. And so we need to create spaces for all survivors to speak out and not just a privileged few. And then the last thing, last but not least, we need to get in the way materially of business as usual for the porn industry. There's a number of ways to do this. Again, going back to the Civil Rights Ordinance, one of the things that I like about it, besides setting an important legal precedent, it would have made it more difficult for pornographers to do what they do. Some of them would have been sued for being abusive. Some of them would have to become more cautious to avoid lawsuits kind of preemptively. Some of them might even leave the industry. They might say, you know what, this is too much of a headache. I might get sued. I don't want to bother with this. I'm just going to take my money and invest it in something else. But we need to actually get in the way of the industry one way or another. And again, I don't think censorship is a good way to go. But if we have a mass movement, there are so many creative things that we can think of, invent, create, and make happen. I'll be honest and say that I don't think most men are going to voluntarily give up porn. And it pains me to say that. I think some will because they care about equality deeply. And I think some will also because of what it does to their own sexuality. But basically we have this huge $97 billion a year industry that's hurting women for male pleasure, and it thinks it can get away with anything. And it's spreading that entitlement to a lot of consumers and to a lot of young men. So we're just gonna have to get in their way. Stop them from hurting women for fun and for profit. And again, a mass movement of dedicated people can come up with ways to do that. Pornography is violence against women. The only question is, are we gonna accept it? Are we gonna take it as something inevitable that just has to exist? Or are we going to resist? To quote one of my favorite feminists, quote, "That is the real meaning of the much misused word choice." Thank you. Okay, so I think we're just gonna, if people want to stay for a Q&A, I'm happy to answer any questions. Sure, I'm just going to pass this mic around. I'm not sure how to turn it on. So I'm just going to feel free to pass that around.
I just had a couple of questions about some of the terms you were using.
Sure.
I don't remember all of them, but I think one was like BDSM.
BDSM, yeah, I'm sorry for not clearing that up. So BDSM stands for, it stands for three things. B and D is bondage and discipline. D and S in the middle is dominance and submission. And then S and M at the end is sadism and masochism. So it's a form of sexuality where people dominate each other. Sometimes people will tie each other up, whip each other. And it's based on that kind of theme of, I guess, using violence. Some of the people in the community wouldn't see it as violence, but basically some form of either violence or domination. And that's the sexual appeal of it.
I just want to say that I think BDSM isn't, I think in those videos that are shown, it's, that is a problem, but I feel like it's, when it's not pornography, I think it's between two consenting adults.
Right, okay, so.
And that's their fetish or what they.
Right, I understand. I'm actually not going to get into that just because it's a complicated topic and we don't have the time to address it. But for the purposes of this presentation, I am talking about BDSM and pornography and the porn industry. That's what I'm focusing on. So